Hey, Teddy K here for the Best Buy blog, and in this video review we took a look at the Fujifilm X-T4. This is one of Fuji's latest mirrorless cameras aimed primarily at serious amateurs and pros. The X-T4 bears a lot of resemblance to the X-T3. Fuji didn't change a whole lot here, but it did change some key things. It does use the same image sensors, so it still has 26 megapixel APS-C sensor, which already was very good on the previous camera and is really good on this one too. So what is different though? Well, you have in-body image stabilization in this case, and as well you also have an articulating 3-inch LCD screen. Both of these features probably have a bigger impact for video than they do for still photos, but they are still good to have in both cases. Although frankly, I would prefer a tilting screen as opposed to an articulating screen, but you know, sometimes it works well either way. There's so much inside this camera that I'd recommend that you either bring the manual with you or download the digital version and load it onto your phone and bring it with you, because there are some links on there that you can actually tap to get to some shortcuts. You will need it because there's just so much going on with the camera and all its features that there will be things that you didn't even know were in here or things you didn't realize that you could do. This is especially true if you don't know Fuji system and the menu system, which is already pretty deep and convoluted as it is. It's not the easiest thing to navigate. And speaking of navigation, you also have the physical dials here at the top of the camera. So you have dials for ISO, for shutter speed, there's even a drive dial mode at the bottom, and of course exposure compensation. So the drive dial mode is where you can switch from HDR or single shot, or you can do burst, like high burst, low burst, or you can even bracketing. So those are all very cool to use, but you have to know how to use them and remember what settings you had too. Personally, I like the dials because it allowed me to very quickly make changes to any shots. So if I felt like I was a little bit too underexposed or overexposed, I could quickly make a change and do that, and it's fine. Now, aperture doesn't have a dial, but you can actually set it so that the front rotating dial can change the aperture. You got to go into the menu to do that, which I'm showing here in the video, and then it's easily done. So that way you essentially turn the X-T4 into a full manual setup. If if that's something you're comfortable with doing, that's probably the best way to use this camera. Now, Fuji did change the autofocus. Well, I shouldn't say change, they improved it. So it is a little bit faster than it was with the X-T3. And even though I haven't shot with that camera in the past, I can't make a comparison as to how much better it is, but needless to say, what I experienced here was pretty good. The thing is though, is that by default, the camera that I tested had, in terms of phase detection points, had 117, but you can also do 425. So I switched it to 425 so I can be a little bit more precise on where I wanted that focal point to go. And if I wanted to increase the size of that focal point, I could literally just press the joystick button and use the rotating dial here in the back and do it very quickly. I shot photos with both the 18 to 55 millimeter lens and also with the 55 to 200. So I had plenty of range at my disposal in shooting this. I wish it would have been nice if I had a wider angle lens to try that out too, but unfortunately I didn't have one to test it out with. But needless to say, with these two lenses, I had a pretty good idea of what I was shooting. I always shoot in RAW personally. I do shoot in JPEG as well, but I love RAW for the obvious reasons, which, I can just process the shots myself and get a lot more detail out of them when I am editing them. And so the photos that I'm showing here that I took with the camera, for the most part, were edited in RAW, in Lightroom. And you can see that the camera is quite capable of getting quite a bit of detail in every shot. And that includes even when I was fully zoomed at 200, or at least 180 to 200 millimeters with the zoom lens. Video benefits a lot from these changes too. And I liked some of the footage I got. It came out crisp, clear, it was really good. And it's easier to shoot with this, I found, because again, you have a really nice body. It's one of the most comfortable cameras that I've used in a long time. And so, trying to be steady or even using it with a gimbal, not going to be a problem. I didn't like the autofocus a whole lot, primarily because I didn't like the way the tracking worked. So coming from a Sony system, for example, where you just tap on the screen and it just follows that subject, that's not exactly how it works here. You have to either use multi or area. There's the two modes that Fuji has, and in one case you have the subject will be tracked more or less within the frame, assuming that it locks onto it. And then in area, you can determine where you wanted it to track on the frame. So to me, it would have been easier if again, the same kind of tracking that was used for still photos would have applied to video. The articulating screen makes a huge difference when it comes to shooting video too, simply because of the way you can articulate it. So even if you're looking to do vlogging, you're doing selfies, things like that, that's not going to be a problem doing it on here because you can just articulate the screen any way you want. I should mention that there are 2 SD card slots here. And this is great because not only can you save to one card or another, but you can actually use them as a redundancy so that you can save to both cards at the same time, ensuring that just in case one card fails, the other card's got everything that you shot already. So it's a great feature and one that you might want to use, especially if you're shooting maybe you're shooting something that you really, really desperately don't want to lose the photos on and you want that extra insurance. That's one way to get it. Battery life is rated at 500 shots per charge. 600 if you're using economy mode. I did not bother to use economy mode primarily because it made the autofocus a little bit slower and it lowered the LCD's frame rate to 30 frames per second. Those are features I really don't want to sacrifice. So I just went with the regular normal mode, and it's hard for me to approximate how much you can get, especially if you're shooting video at the same time. But you can probably look at 400 shots. Even if you're shooting some video, definitely 400 shots. But if you're primarily shooting video, then the number of stills you'll get will probably be lower than that. But it's still, if you're going to shoot all day with this, you should be fine. You can always get another battery on top of that, or get a battery grip if you want a little bit extra insurance that way too. So I'm just going to include that this camera ultimately is not for beginners looking for something else. Unless you've really taken the time to learn what ISO, shutter speed, aperture do, and you've gotten comfortable in shooting that way, or even shooting in RAW. I mean, yeah, the JPEGs are great, but really, if you're going to shoot a camera at this level, I think you should be shooting in RAW personally. So as long as you're comfortable with those settings and you know how to use them, and you'd be comfortable using them on a camera like this, then by all means, the X-T4 is not going to disappoint you. In terms of the whole debate of APS-C sensors versus full-frame sensors, that's beyond the scope of this video, so I can't get into that here. But needless to say, even with the crop factor on the lenses involved, you're still going to get very, very good photos on this, especially when you learn all the features. I mean, I didn't even get into the film simulation modes, but there's plenty to play with there. There's like a dozen of them to play with. So you've got a lot to work with this camera. It just does take time to get there, so you're going to have to be patient to begin with when you get it, unless you're coming from another XT series camera where you have some familiarity with where everything might be. And that's my review of the Fuji X-T4 for the Best Buy blog. I'm Teddy K. Thanks for watching.